thank you very much to all the organizers of the Casablanca Declaration for inviting us to this conference. So Christophe is an economic consultant, and I'm an attorney at the Toulouse bar. And we are committed to opposing surrogacy for over 5 years, I would say. We begin by collaborating on the publication of a comparative law book on surrogacy, entitled Surrogacy to Say Yes or to Say No. And since then, we have collaborated on petitions to respond to consultation for different UN bodies to denounce the practice of surrogacy. Today, as you know, money makes the world go round. So we would like to emphasize the role of the financial flows in international surrogacy. We are in the framework of a country like France, which is the country whose law we know best. So a country where surrogacy is prohibited, but still nationals go abroad to have an international surrogacy. And in this context, international flows of money happen. So we ask ourselves the questions if they are legal tools, international legal tools, or national legal tools to prevent these financial flows from happening.
Yes, and so as a first step, we would like to keep dive in who are the middlemen of the surrogacy industry. When we look at the industry of surrogacy, there are two key characteristics which appears to us, which are striking. The first one is globalization, and the second one is labor division. Based on globalization, there are two very important impacts which are linked to globalization. First one is to decrease prices. The market, in understanding the market of surrogacy, only exists because of wage differences, because of purchasing power differences between the country of a buyer and the country of a surrogate mother. And if you look at the data, in some countries, the surrogate mother is paid up to 10 years of minimum wages, which is, for instance, 15,000 euros in Ukraine. But that 10 years of minimum wages in Ukraine represent less than 1 year of wage for the upper or middle class in Europe. And basically today, surrogacy is cheap. Surrogacy is as cheap as a car. And for the price of an electric car, you can buy surrogacy, which means that the market for people to go inside surrogacy is very big. And that is thanks to globalization. Globalization, as in other industry, decreases the price of surrogacy. Globalization is also very important because it enables law shopping. It has already been discussed yesterday. Through globalization, you can take the law in the country which is the most favorable for your surrogacy process. So that's the two main impacts of surrogacy. As it's linked to globalization, it's always linked to international financial transaction, which we are going to look at it in a second step. Another aspect, which we just described, is labor division. In surrogacy, there's a very strong labor division. A lot of people are doing surrogacy, a lot of middlemen are doing surrogacy as a professional activities. Because, contrary to other bioethics topics, you need professionals to do the surrogacy process. Who are these professionals? Obviously, you have a broker and the agency, which is based in another country. And after came the lawyer, the insurance company, the sperm and egg banks, the doctors, the surrogate mother, and all the travel expenses. What is important is if you look at the data, more than 2/3 of the value of a surrogate contract goes to these middlemen. For instance, if you take Ukraine, where a surrogate contract costs between 50 and 60,000 euros, the surrogate mother only takes 15,000 euros. 2/3 of the value go to these middlemen. And it really shows that the surrogate mother is just a commodity and that the added value of the industry are all these middlemen. In these middlemen, we ask ourselves the question, who is the one we should target to stop the surrogacy process? And we came to the conclusion that the one we should target to stop the surrogacy process are the banks, the financial institution. Because the financial institution are the one who are doing the payment, who are going to pay all these middlemen. And if you stop the financial flow, you're going to stop that industry because it's done for lucrative motivations. We target the banks also for different reasons. We have an issue in surrogacy that most of the middlemen are based in foreign countries, which means it's quite difficult with your national law to prosecute people who are in another country. But the bank, they are located in your home country. So they're subject to national law. They're subject to national law and they're only doing an international transaction to bring the money from the home country to the foreign country where surrogacy is proceeded. That's why we think it's quite interesting to look at the bank, because a national legislator may be able to put some specific obligation to the bank to impeach any kind of transaction linked to surrogacy. Financial institutions and banks have two aspects in surrogacy. First one, they enable the transaction, and second one, they're also raising the funds, because maybe 50,000 euro is a lot of people in Europe are able to spend 50,000 euros for a car, but still it's difficult to do it without a loan. So you have to raise all the money. You have two aspects in the financial institution: raising the money and paying the middlemen. That's what we're going to look at it. In the second step, we're going to look at which tools could be used to stop these financial flow. Just one last word about that. I think it's quite interesting as an approach, because it happens, if you are able to stop the financial flow, the surrogacy process will never start in the first place. It's happened before the starting of surrogacy process, which is maybe a bit difficult, a bit different from some kind of penal prosecutions, which you need to have some things already started in order to use these prosecution tools. In that case, we are before any kind of process.
The financing of surrogacy can be done by family money, can be done by crowdfunding platforms on some instance, and can also be done through bank loans, such as consumer credit, for example. When you look at the website of surrogacy agencies, when you look also at articles of people who have done surrogacies abroad, you see that it's the most current form of financing. So the first question that we ask ourselves as regards to national tools is that are they efficient, are they enough to prevent this kind of loans to happen? In France, for example, where surrogacy is prohibited, you also have a general principle of law that all contracts should have a valid and legal object. And when you look at this general principle of law, it should be enough, to our opinion, to stop a bank to loan money that is directed to a surrogacy arrangement. But in fact, it does not really effectively prevent this kind of financing. Because people can just lie about the object of the bank loan. For example, a crowdfunding platform in the recent years preventing the money from going to buyers because they open a crowdfunding operation with the explicit object of financing a surrogacy. But other LGBT journals commented that it's efficient to lie about the final object of the crowdfunding operation to make it happen. So it seems that the national tools are not really efficient. Furthermore, there's another general principle of law that prevents banks from investigating the most of a financial transaction. It is the duty of non-interference of banks that prevent them to investigate the reason for banking transactions. So it's a general principle that apply to all your bank accounts, and it's quite normal. It protects the customers, and it also protects the bank from liability claims. But there are some exceptions to this principle of duty of non-interference. There's the duty of due diligence, but that held the bank accountable for realizing transactions that has the appearance of being unlawful. So this is also an interesting tool, but In practice, once again, it's a really case-by-case analysis by banks if they should or not prevent a transaction from happening. So it seems that the duty of non-diligence and the principle of a lawful contract are not enough in the as national tools to prevent the financing of surrogacy. So we looked at other tools, especially for international transactions, and we looked especially at the tools that are used for fighting money laundering and financing of terrorism, and also as the tools for asset freezes.
Yes, because basically this issue about financing surrogacy is not specific to surrogacy. You have a lot of cases where banks and financial institutions are used to finance illegal activities. And the most striking one, money laundering and also terrorism financing. And that's why in most countries and also at the European level, some specific tool has been developed to give to the banks and all the financial institutions an obligation to block and to impeach money laundering or financing terrorism. We looked at these tools and we asked ourselves which ones would be the best suited to fight against surrogacy. The first tool, so in this duty of care that banks have, there are two big tools. First one is asset freezing, and the second one is money laundering. Asset freezing, it's a very political tool. It's a blacklist of companies, of entities whose assets are going to be frozen. It's, for instance, the case today. A lot of Russian companies have assets frozen because of the war against Ukraine. That's a very political move. The interesting part is it's done by the executive, so it's quite quick to implement. And it's obviously tempting to create a list of clinic and of broker agency who are going to do surrogacy abroad and to freeze their assets. However, we quickly disregard that tool because in French law, if there's a blacklist and if your assets are going to be frozen, it doesn't impede you to perceive money. So you are not allowed to use the money because your assets are frozen, but you're still allowed to receive money. And obviously, in the case of surrogacy, we want the opposite. We want that you are not allowed anymore to pay the surrogate agency, but we don't really care about the fact that the money of a surrogate agency is going to be frozen or not. So that tool of asset freezing doesn't seem the most relevant and the most striking to fight against surrogacy. The second one, we believe, is more interesting because today what's happening in money laundering and combating financing of terrorism, banks and all kinds of financial institutions, they have an obligation to monitor the transaction and to declare suspicious transaction to the government. So each time there's a suspicious transaction, either because of money laundering or because of terrorism, they have to notify the government to do that, about that. In France, it's the governmental agency TRACFIN, which is going to take care about that. And the government stop temporarily the transaction. In France, the government can stop the transaction for 5 days. And during that time period, a judge should look at the transaction and decide if that transaction should be definitively blocked or not. So, three-step mechanism: banks have to declare the suspicions, government can temporarily stop the transaction, and after a judge will confirm that that transaction has to be stopped. We believe it's quite interesting for surrogacy because first one, every financial institution has to comply with that law, not only banks, also crowdfunding, so it's quite wide. Second very positive aspect, all financial institutions have to declare the suspicious transactions, which means that the government will have a lot of information or data about surrogacy. And the third one is it's indeed feasible to stop the transaction if the judge decided so. So that's why we think it's quite an interesting tool that needs to be adapted to surrogacy.
The work that we are presenting today is quite exploratory, so it's really an experiment of thought. What would the adaptation be to incorporate a new ground for the duty of banks to stop some kind of some specific transactions. So we think that the main adaptation that would need to be put in place for that would be first that there is an offense of surrogacy in criminal law in the home country. That is pretty obvious. That's the case for some countries, but not for all. The second step would be that there is in national law an exception to the principle of reciprocity of criminalization, because as for now, if the national law can only prosecute an offense that is committed abroad, if this offense is also criminalized in the country where it is committed. But there are some exceptions to this principle. In French law, for example, there's an exception for sexual offenses against minors. There's an exception for terrorism, trafficking in human beings, for really serious offense, and also, a bit more surprisingly, for participation in human cloning. So for this kind of offenses, even if they are committed abroad, you can prosecute a national that has committed these offenses abroad, even if the foreign country do not criminalize these offenses. So the second step would be to create a new exception, that is to allow a national country to prosecute a national that has been committing the offense of surrogacy abroad, if, for example, in the United States, where it's not criminalized. So it's a big step, but it has been done before, and it is also plausible. So another adaptation that needs to be done is to extend the mission of the governmental body that is in charge of supervising the suspicious activity reports. And we would just like to note that more generally, these tools of combating money laundering and the financing of terrorism can be extended to all forms of human trafficking, including surrogate motherhood or organ trafficking, as far as the patterns of the financial flows are quite distinguishable. I mean, you know where countries the financial flows initiated from, and you know to which country it goes, and you know and you know also the amounts of the transaction in general. So it's an exploratory work, but we think it is feasible. It will also have to overcome some legal obstacles, because, as you know, free trade is much protected by international treaties, but there are exceptions that are already in place. And we think that it's the most interesting tool that we have found so far to prevent the financial flows from international surrogacy to happen.